Welcome to What's Up Wednesday. Disability Network has an opportunity to share information with community members on a regular basis about topics of importance. And today we're going to be talking about the U.S. Census. It is time for the census. Census Day was really considered to be April 1st, but we have more time than that to complete the census. So we're going to talk a little bit today about why that's so important and how to go about completing that. I'm gonna pop my screen up here for you. Okay, so the census, as you may know, is required under constitutional law. It was actually written into our Constitution that we count every person in the US every 10 years. So that data, those numbers that they get from the census, provide the basis for distributing about $800 billion in federal funds. And that means they go to communities all over the country, but it's based on those numbers. And so if those numbers aren't right, some places might not get their fair share of funding. And that pays for things like housing and transportation and roads and bridges, healthcare, some employment supports, a lot of different things, and we'll talk about what some of those are. They also are used to draw the boundaries of our congressional districts. So we hear sometimes about, well, your district, your Senate representative, your congressman covers this particular area. Well, that's based on the number of people that live in that area. So if a whole bunch of people, let's say, move to the other side of the state, they would get more representation because there's more people there. So if those numbers don't reflect accurately how many people are there, we might be underrepresented. And actually in the last census, that's what happened to Michigan. We lost representation, and we don't want that to happen again. So we want to make sure that we've got an accurate count. The census is important because, as I mentioned, it does count every single person. That's the idea behind it. So we want to get as close to an accurate count as we can. It counts every person living in the United States as well as 5 US territories. People started receiving invitations to complete the census in March, and there's a couple different ways you can complete it. We'll talk about that. Once your invitation has arrived, we ask that you complete it. If you have lost it, I can tell you where you can find that information. But most people got a postcard and or a letter in the mail that said, here's your link and how to complete it. And also came with what we call an individual identifier so that they knew it was your household. You can complete the census online, over the phone, or by mail, and we'll talk about all three of those as well. So I mentioned that the census happens every 10 years, just for if you happen to be curious. This is our 24th census. I mentioned also that it supports some key programs, but also supports some programs that protect the rights of people with disabilities. People with disabilities are historically an undercounted or hard to count group. And there's a lot of reasons for that, partly because there were some accessibility challenges in the past for people to actually complete the census, but also because there's just some systemic inequalities and people haven't had the same access or even maybe didn't feel like they might have had the same right, but that they do. People with disabilities are also overrepresented in other groups that are considered hard to count, such as people of color, people with lower income, and those who might be experiencing homelessness. Just so you know, there are a couple of other underrepresented groups historically. One includes individuals who identify as LGBTQ, but also young children. So they found that sometimes when people do complete the census, they don't think to count all the small children in their house. Perhaps they're thinking of only working age adults, and that's not the case. We want to make sure every person is counted. Our focus is obviously on people with disabilities. The last estimate in the census was that we have 61 million people with disabilities living in the United States. And again, we want to make sure that our voice is accurately reflected, and that census count helps us do that. One of the questions I get sometimes is, what about individuals who live in group settings? Let me back up for just 1 second, because I wanted to let people know that in 2018, they did what I'm going to call a dry run. They did kind of like a practice census to see what the likelihood that people would respond, particularly online, would be. And they got higher than they expected of people who did respond online. And so they're hoping that people will self-report in that way, which is why they started with that method. So sometimes folks in group settings might not have that same opportunity, or haven't received, for example, a postcard to their household because they're not living in their own household. So there's a few examples here, like skilled nursing facilities, student dorms at colleges and universities, prisons, folks who are in the military, or homeless shelters are a few examples. So if people were living in a group setting like that, they call it group quarters in the standards that they talk about how to reach those folks. There would have been a person identified at that setting that was responsible for the group count. And so if people were living in one of these settings on April 1st, they do not need to self-respond. I already talked a little bit about the number of things that the census impacts, and a lot of these we think of in our community: libraries, schools, public transportation, roads, highways, even the fire department. And so it's really critical. Our communities need these kinds of supports, and if we don't have an accurate count, we won't get enough federal funding to help support those efforts in our community. So I just want to stress the importance of that, because these are some critical supports that we use, everybody uses in our community on a regular basis. There are some other services as well that you might not think of, particularly in regard to supporting individuals with disabilities. So the federal programs currently play a really critical role in protecting political, socio-cultural, and even economic rights of all people living in the United States, including people with disabilities. So I just want to give you an idea of some of those dollars that are supporting some of the work that we do. When we talk about civil rights and advocacy, every state has a designated protection and advocacy system. It's Michigan Protection and Advocacy Services in Michigan. And $155 million goes toward those services typically every year. That's how much went in 2019. To the DD councils, they get $75 million. Our statewide independent living councils receive about $24 million. But there's also education programs that are supported. Title I grants really work to support and narrow the achievement gaps between individuals receiving maybe special education services or supplemental services in the school setting, and they get almost $16 million. And then under the IDEA, that's one of them under Part B, IDEA supports students with disabilities, typically between the ages of 3 and 21. In Michigan, that number is a little bit higher. We support individuals through the age of 26. But that really supported over 7 million children last year alone who benefited from some supplemental services in our school system. Food and nutrition programs, most of us know of that as SNAP currently, and we had 73 million go toward that program last year. Healthcare, just another example, $418 billion goes toward Medicaid. Now we know that a number of individuals with disabilities are supported by the Medicare program throughout our country, whether it's through actual health care, whether it's through waiver services or supplemental programs that help people stay at home. So again, it's critical that we have an accurate, we get the funding to support people so that they can live where and how they choose. Housing also, we talk about supportive housing, Section 8, the choice voucher programs. We have about 230 million that goes toward housing. And then our voc rehab, we, again, last year alone had $3.5 billion that helped support over 170,000 people through our vocational rehab program to maintain employment. So it's a big deal, and I don't mean to whittle that down to dollars, but this count really does reflect how many dollars come into our area. And without an accurate count, we won't have enough funding to support all the people who need it. Fighting with my mouse over here, sorry. So one of the other things when we talk about individuals with disabilities historically being underrepresented, one of the things the Census Bureau looked at is, why is that the case? And I mentioned earlier that they identified some accessibility challenges, and they have worked really hard to make sure that all the methods that you might use to complete the census are fully accessible. And it doesn't matter if you do it online, on phone, or via mail. They're working really diligently to make sure that that process is accessible to you. So just a reminder, Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 mandates that all federal agencies, that includes the United States Census Bureau, have to make their electronic and information technology accessible to people with disabilities. And so that IT portion, that online portion, should be very user-friendly for you. They also sent out Braille and large print guides that were really sort of a how-to. They offered assistance to individuals to walk them through how to self-respond. We also have language guides that are available for folks. Again, that gives some instruction, sort of an instruction guide, and those are available in 59 languages in addition to English. And they also have an American Sign Language video guide to help explain that process. Also, there's a call center. I mentioned that you can complete the census online, over the phone. And at that call center, not only can you respond in English, but there's also folks that can assist you in 12 other languages, and they're the 12 most common in the United States. So they really worked hard to make sure that that process is user-friendly for everybody. So these are the three methods that I mentioned. You can complete it online at my2020census.gov. There are instructions on there if you need additional assistance. There's a whole lot of Q&A, FAQs on there. So if you're like, how secure is this? Where is this going? How do I know this is legitimate? How do I answer this question? There's some tutorials on there. That phone number is there for you as well. Some folks don't have internet at home or aren't comfortable using someone else's computer. You can call and complete that. A census worker will answer that. Your responses, just so you're aware, are absolutely confidential. So the Census Bureau, regardless of the method that you choose to complete your census, uses that information for demographic purposes. It does not get shared with any other, not even any other federal department. So it's absolutely confidential. They can't release any of that information for 70 years. And so some people didn't know that, and that can let them feel a little bit more secure about sharing information if for some reason they're hesitant. Just so you're aware also, if you begin to complete that census form online and for some reason you get interrupted, you will have to start over. It does not save your data. That's part of assuring your security. So just be aware of that. If for some reason you have to stop, you will need to start over. Wanted you to just be aware also, some people, again, are concerned about security by mail. I've got a I want to make sure if you do receive that form in the mail that there are some scams out there. So you want to make sure that it's actually from the U.S. Census Department. As it mentions, or it says on the screen, the return address will actually say to the United States Census Bureau and the Department of Commerce, and that's one of the departments that just helps disperse some of the information they have. The return address is listed on that screen. Again, that's the only place that it would be going. The enclosed envelope for mailing for the completed paper questionnaire will be addressed either to Jeffersonville or to Phoenix. And those are both their mail processing centers. So this information is available on the Census Bureau's website as well. So if you don't need to remember that or write it down unless you want to. But it lists it right there, so you can double check that if you're going to be filling it out on paper. Just a reminder also to avoid scams. The Census Bureau is never going to ask you for your full Social Security number. You don't have to pay to complete or send the census. You don't have to give them your credit card number. These are not things that are part of census data. Anything about your political party, no money exchange, things like that. They're not going to call and say, well, are you a Republican or a Democrat? That doesn't matter. What matters is if you are in the United States on April the 1st. So I want to take you to just some of the sample questionnaire so that you can get a sense of what that looks like. Let's see. So again, question 1 would have been, how many people were living in or staying in this apartment? And this is exactly what it looks like. You can see that kind of bluish box there. In this, on the screen, it's actually just highlighting the question that they're working on, but the whole page is really kind of blue. And question 2 then asks, were there any additional people staying here that you didn't include in question 1? And it's a number, okay? Again, is this a house, apartment, or a mobile home owned by you or someone in this household with a mortgage or loan? The census does track some information about home ownership, and so that's why that question is there. What's your telephone number? Again, this is to identify the household. It's also helpful that you complete this in the event that they have a question, if there's something that is unclear, or if maybe they couldn't read something, that they can call you and make sure that what they're tracking is accurate information. So don't worry about giving that out. Keep in mind also, and I want you to be confident in the privacy of your information. So the Census Bureau doesn't share that information with anybody. It doesn't even share it with other federal departments. It absolutely keeps that in. Only the Census Bureau has that, and again, it's mostly to track that demographic information. Actually, by law, they don't release any of the census information for 70 years. So your information is kept in confidence. So the next question then says, what's the person's name? Again, they want to make sure they know who's living where. It's quite a scroll down to the next, sorry. What is this person's gender? Again, here you have the opportunity to mark male or female. If you don't identify as either of those, you do not have to complete this question. It does not void the rest of your responses. They were considering putting another option in here, and I see that they have not done that. So it's okay if you don't answer that question, if you don't identify with either of those. What is the person's age and date of birth? Again, they want to make sure they've got the right person at the right location. Some people have the same names, and that might not be you. Is this person of Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin? And again, that's just, you can check if that's appropriate. If it's not, you don't need to check that. What is the person's race? And they've really expanded the options here. So there's probably something that people will identify with. They again worked really hard to make sure that people's ethnic backgrounds were accurately reflected. So you've got more options there. And then it just goes on to the next person. So you would complete the same information for person number 2, person number 3, person number 4, and just keep going on, okay? And then it asks, does this person usually live or stay somewhere else? And again, this is important because we're looking at April 1st as sort of the benchmark date. And so I mentioned if someone was staying with you, even temporarily, then they should have been reflected in your census, even if they don't live there usually. Are these individuals related? And so you have an opportunity to say if it's your son or your wife, if it's somebody that's not related who's living with you, that's okay too. And it really is quite inclusive as to whether, you know, it's a stepchild or a foster child, somebody who's not related to you or just a roommate. And then there's an opportunity to put that, okay? And that is it. There are no citizenship questions on the 2020 census. Some individuals had some concerns about, oh, are they gonna kick me out of the country? There was lots of discussion, some of you might remember, about immigration status, and that question has not been included on the census. I just want you to be aware of that. So hopefully it was helpful to at least take a peek at that form and get a sense for some of the kinds of questions that would be on it. It is fairly simple to complete. So we definitely encourage folks to do that because it does, as I mentioned, make a big difference as to how much funding comes to our community, and also make sure that we have that seat in Congress to represent Michigan. If you do need any assistance in completing the census, we can help you do that. We cannot complete it for you, but we can help with that. We can also do a 3-way call so that if you're concerned that you might not understand what the Census Bureau is asking, that we can be on that phone to support on the phone line with you and the Census Bureau at the same time, so that we can assist you with that process. So I want you to encourage everybody you know to complete the census. As I mentioned, it's not hard. We do have an extension because of the pandemic and the deadline to complete the census. So census workers were going to be going door to door beginning April 1st. That did not happen. There was some outreach in a few areas, but for the most part, that has been extended. And so the big push now is going to start in July, and the deadline for completion of the census now is October 31st. So we have time to make sure that folks and families have done that. That might be helpful for outreach to families once whatever the school year starting looks like, that we can reach families and make sure those young kids are counted again as well. So any questions about any of that? Just so you are aware, there is also a place on the website, the census.gov website, that talks about response rates. And in our area, we've really had a pretty aggressive and proactive group trying to get folks to complete that information. And in Bay County alone, just as an example, we're at a 75% self-response rate already, which is phenomenal. So good job as you reach out to folks that you work with. Again, just ask that question if they've completed it. And if not, let's offer support to make sure that that does happen. Okay. And we'll see you next week. Have a great day.